Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the show where we go beyond the data to explore the people, the stories, and all of the insights that really drive business success. I'm Dave Bookbinder, and I am known as a business valuation expert and best-selling author, and I thank you for joining me. Today, my guest is Shannon Lucas. She is co-founder and co-CEO of Catalyst Constellations. Shannon's an innovation strategist, a former executive at Ericsson and Vodafone, and co-author of the book Move Fast, Break Stuff, Burnout. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's a different S word, gang. But as I was telling Shannon, we got flagged by the content police and don't want to be referred to as an explicit show. So move fast, break stuff. You get it. Burn out. Shannon's work focuses on helping organizations identify and support the employees who naturally drive transformation and innovation from within. And today we're going to be going behind the numbers to talk about leadership, innovation, burnout, and what businesses often misunderstand about their most valuable people and their most valuable asset. Shannon, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Excited to be here.
It is my pleasure. And thanks for playing nice with me about the title of the book.
It's all good. I'm a troublemaker. I'm used to it, you know?
And that's what I love about you. So I tried to be a troublemaker before we dropped that word. And as I was telling you before we went on the air here, the show got flagged as explicit and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what that was all about. So anyway, audience gets it. They understand. And we'll talk about the book in a
Good,
little bit.
wholesome content, Dave. It's all good.
It's a family program. Yes. So let's get this show started, shall we? You've worked inside large global organizations. Now you're advising companies on transformation and innovation. What first made you realize that many organizations unintentionally suppress their most innovative people?
What first made me realize it was sort of my own lived experience. So I'll jump in and tell a story in the middle of my career. I was fortunate enough to be at Vodafone at a really interesting time when mobility was really, taking off and transforming how people were communicating around the world and how businesses were operating. And I started on the technical sales side, but really quickly realized that the technology wasn't the problem for most customers, right? It was like understanding how it connected to their business and then thinking about how to actually implement that. So I started doing innovation workshops with our customers and got tapped to build out the innovation program at Vodafone, which was so fun. And we had this thesis. We're like, we don't want an ivory tower of innovation. We really knew that there were these positive troublemakers all over the world with Vodafone who were already doing great stuff. And we're like, let's stop reinventing the wheel. Let's connect these people, give them a shared language, shared framework, and remove some of the barriers that everybody knows that companies have in terms of driving change. The program was wildly successful. And a few years later, successful, let me quantify that, like tens of millions of in-year revenue, products to market, hundreds of millions in pipeline. I mean, like actually quantify with numbers, demonstrating impact. But a few years in, that Innovation Champion program, as we had called it, had grown significantly, and I was burning out. And the reason that I was burning out was because even though it was a volunteer program, I could see that there were some people who were moving at speed and other people who didn't move at speed, even though it was a volunteer program. And so I was like, what is the difference between these people? And so that started my journey into trying to understand both why I was burning out, but what this difference was. I hired an executive coach. I'll make a long story sort of short. And that executive coach is Tracy Lovejoy, now my co-CEO. And as she was helping me, she was also exploring this very question, like, what is it that blocks change in large organizations? And she had identified the same people that I was working with, that I identify as these catalysts who create change even when they're not asked for it sometimes. But we also realize that there are organizational conditions that don't help these people thrive. And one is just the lack of recognition. Organizations often treat everybody as if they have the same relationship to change. So if you think about a change management program, you'll have this big office that's dedicated to rolling out change, and everyone is expected to go on the journey at the exact same time and momentum. And that's not realistic. We know from Rogers' diffusions of innovations curve that there's early adopters, catalysts, and there's laggards. So that's one big place that we talk about, and is like understand that there's this breadth of people who have a different relationship with change, and then also helping them understand that people's resistance to change is actually just a data point, and we need to be able to meet people where they are and give them the tools that they need, help them connect it to their sort of own personal vision and mission and raison d'etre in life to help accelerate the change at speed.
Yeah, good stuff. We talked about recognition and how important that is on a previous episode of this show. One of the things that comes up a lot in my conversations and the research I've done in connecting the dots between the value that people contribute to a business enterprise and the value of that enterprise is trust. If you can't trust your leadership to not ridicule, dismiss, or implement suggestions, people are less inclined to raise their hand and do that, call it catalyst type behavior.
It's 100% true. We work a lot with Lencioni's five dysfunctions, and trust is the bottom of the pyramid that he talks about. Because to your point, you can't have the healthy debate and work through conflict if you don't trust that there aren't going to be repercussions to that. Psychological safety is, connected to that, and there's a lot of performative psychological safety, I would say, these days. The trust really, especially in the time of this like accelerated pace of change and the amplitude of change, is like we're not going to get it right every time the first time. And we have to also understand that we can take some missteps and even fail sometimes, and that they're going to have our backs because we're almost all doing something net new, right? We didn't use AI as a tool 4 years ago. And so absolutely leaders need to be able to cultivate trust. That's a journey that doesn't start overnight. That starts with like being really human, showing up yourself as a really vulnerable, authentic human, and getting to know people, like knowing their kids, knowing what they care about, all of the things that make them human so that you can connect in that deep and profound way. I will say there is an interesting sort of other side of the coin to that, which is if people have worked in organizations or had, 15 or 20 years in the corporate world where they didn't have deep trust and deep psychological safety, it's sort of like you can lead a horse to water, but not everyone is going to be able to lean into the environment where you're trying to really cultivate trust and psychological safety. And I had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, oftentimes that's the only way we learn those things. So, what actually defines a catalyst, and why are they so important today?
So we haven't done the longitudinal research to say whether it's nature or nurture, but what we know at some point is this is a way of being. It's not an option. So you can choose to be a change agent like the innovation champion stories, but you can't choose to be or not be a catalyst for better or worse. Hence the title of the book. So catalysts are constantly dot connecting, like you were talking about. They're constantly seeking. They'll read a sci-fi book. They'll work with a new AI tool. They'll be in conversations at a happy hour in Philly. And from that, they're starting to see the themes that are emerging maybe before other people have seen them. If we stopped there, we'd call them visionaries. But the thing that really defines them is this bent towards action. Catalysts can't stop themselves from trying to make the systems around them better. And that could be everything from you're standing in line at a Starbucks and it's inefficient and you're seeing all the ways that you could like try and you're making suggestions to the barista, to how you're driving change at home or at work. Another thing that's interesting is that people will describe catalysts as being comfortable with risk and ambiguity. And there's a scale there. Like I'm an adrenaline junkie. I like risk. Tracy is a researcher. She wants more data, right? But what's interesting about our relationship to that is we're often seeing the thing that's like risky if we don't do it. And that can be hard to explain to organizations because you're kind of like trying to prove a negative. If we don't do this, this is going to be the impact of that. And then finally, we really move through the world with an experimentation mindset. So we're drawn to the scientific method or design thinking early and start it because what we know is we have a vision of what we want to do. We move into action to change it. We get some data. Hopefully we iterate, and then we're doing sort of the next round of that. And the reason that they're so important now, you can imagine having described this, in this world of constant change, who are the people who are not just not afraid of it, but the ones who are just naturally leaning into it and trying to help get the signal through the noise into the system to make the positive change before it's too late.
Yeah, so many things going through my head as you were talking about that. And one of them that I want to just kick around with you a little bit and chew on it is not every catalyst is in a leadership role, like members of an executive committee, so to speak. So you've got people that are driven, they're naturally curious, they're the ones that are inspired, that truly fit that category of catalyst. But if they're not looked upon as a positive, and I can see where perhaps sometimes they may not, that could really tend to bog down the whole innovation inside an organization that otherwise is, talking about innovation, but not necessarily doing the innovation piece. How do you bridge that gap so that leaders who are listening to this program can understand that those people that they think are, the wild children, so to speak, are actually resources that should be harnessed for good?
Thank you for ending with that framing. That's exactly right. So when Tracy shared out with me her first research around Catalyst, it was both like this revelatory moment, but also this like cringe moment. Cause I was like, oh my God, I didn't understand how abrasive and how, some of my drive to create change could have come across to other people. So just to start off with, when catalysts start to get the self-recognition and the self-awareness that they're operating differently than other people, then they can start to make different choices that will diminish some of that resistance that they actually end up increasing often when they're not aware. And so that's the sad part. I mean, there are catalysts who are self-aware enough from the get-go that are really good at it. I wasn't one of them. I had to develop those skills. But for the executives, it's like when you see those troublemakers, as soon as we start talking to executives, the names start popping off, right? They're like, oh, that person, that person, that person. And then it's just like, this is an untapped resource for you with very little investment and very little coaching. You can take them on this journey where they become this massive, like, perpetual energy machine, motion machine for the organization. And so it's like, just make sure that you're not throwing them out before you take the time to really understand. With just a little bit of intervention, they can unlock massive positive change.
So, one of the things that we talk about on this program a lot is the value that people contribute inside of organizations and obviously impact on the enterprise value. So, why do companies oftentimes overlook those individuals that are really creating the most transformational impact inside their organizations?
It's a tough question. Partly it builds on what we were just saying, is because they don't always do it in a way that doesn't increase friction or frustration. And so what we work with organizations, the skills that it takes Catalyst to be successful are skills that everyone should learn to create change. So as an example, you need to be able to clearly articulate your vision to be able to take people on a journey. You need to slow down enough to you go faster in the end by bringing people along. We call it breadcrumbing. You need to think about your influence without authority skills, right? If a Catalyst can do that, it really becomes really easy for the executives to see the impact that they're having. One of the other problems, though, is that Catalysts are we could talk about like the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs of the world, but most of them are really in service of making something better, and they're not super ego driven. So a lot of catalysts fly under the radar in terms of they've created massive change, but they've done it in the seams where there wasn't an executive sponsor, or they created change before there was maybe even the strategic program that was saying that they needed it. And then because of that, they don't articulate their impact and they're moving on to the next thing before anyone is like, what just happened? There's a great example of a friend of mine who was like one level below the C-suite. And he was very much a servant leader, and he's an ultra catalyst. JC, I see you. And so he was really good at he led all of this transformation kind of in the way that I was talking about. It wasn't, he was usually ahead of the curve for the C-suite with that. But one of his things was that as he was doing that and upskilling his team so that they could create this massive impact, he was also making sure that they were seen across the organization. So when the new C-level role came up, his name wasn't really even considered because the C-suite didn't see him as being the leader of that. He had really made sure that everyone else was more visible. So there also is sort of this, like, we're in service of the change, not in service of our own growth, which can get in our own way. And so we have to help catalysts understand, like, you have to be able to quantify your impact, but also be able to tell the story to the right people. And that can feel really uncomfortable because that's not why we do it, but we help them connect those dots. It gives you the license to operate for the next change. It gets you the support you need. And
Yeah.
for leaders, I think, sorry, just to say, for the leaders, it's like slow down a little bit at the leadership team and think about, like, not who's been self-promoting themselves in terms of their impact, but like take a minute and think who's been behind the scenes, maybe orchestrating some of that.
Yeah, some of the catalysts that I've known throughout my career, look at what they've contributed as kind of, yeah, no big deal. That's just how I view the world, right? So how can leaders better identify and frankly support these kinds of catalyst, high impact employees before they get burned out?
I mean, that's one of the things that we go into organizations and help them do. Like, we have a tool that helps them identify the catalyst, because in one organization, we were doing this. And when we identified this catalyst, the leadership was shocked. They were like, and then they slowed down and they thought about it, and people were telling different stories. Well, she does run two nonprofits outside of work, and she has written a couple of books. And so sometimes catalysts, if they aren't getting the sort of, the space to create the change at work, they will find other places to go do that. And so it isn't always easy to know in an organization, if you don't stop and get really intentional, who those catalysts are, because they may have just been like tamped down for too long. I would say, though, like I said, thinking about who the squeaky wheels are and not just writing them off as they need a performance improvement plan, but like sitting down and thinking about like exactly why they were squeaky and what they were doing. The boundary spanners. So if you see people who are like popping up in different parts of the organization, and you're like, why are they in this meeting, or what are they doing? Those are the dot connectors often. And so it's just like bringing a lot of curiosity as a leader. And I would say just slowing down in general and thinking about what your normal distribution of change curve looks like across your employee population, because that's going to serve you really well now and in the upcoming years. Also, because that curve is shifting, right? We need more people who have a better relationship with change across our organization.
When you talk about the performance improvement plan, I thought about the idea of just a performance review process in general.
That's a
And
really that's a great tip. I love that.
yeah, so having been around the block a few times, I realized that many of the performance reviews that I've given or received don't really properly identify this type of behavior.
Yeah.
What can we do about that?
I just always come back to curiosity. And I think as we're working with organizations, we're looking at new just operating models in general, because we can also talk about AI here, the skills that people are going to have and the mindsets. Actually, it's probably even more a mindset thing than a skill, especially with AI, that they're going to have to be successful is shifting so fast that the old operating models, and to your point, the old sort of review processes don't work. I don't think they get us where we want them to be. So I think just continually bringing curiosity to thinking about, like, if this is our vision for where we need to be in 3 years, what do we need to have in terms of skills and mindset in the organization, and how do we, like, proactively invest in our people to get them there? Because most people want to be successful and go on the journey, instead of being like, the punitive version that you haven't been able to do that thus far. Like, we're asking people to show up in a completely new and different way, and it's pretty unfair to judge them on sort of past skills and performance.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about how AI is impacting the business world. When you look into your crystal ball, what are some of the human skills and leadership traits that become even more valuable going forward?
We have a couple executive communities and do a lot of research around this, and the humanness, it's a lot of just the humanness attributes that are going to be super important. So people called them soft skills before. I call them power skills. It's really, again, leading with empathy, bringing curiosity, strategic mindset, like continuing to ask the question, like, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So what are we using these tools for? Going back to sort of like first principles and saying, like, what is the purpose of our organization? What is the purpose of our team? And making sure that people can continually ask that question and get to, like, what problem are we solving then? If this is where we're headed, what problem are we solving? And then there's a lot right now about that we're working with organizations talking about, like, okay, we need to be able to create the container. We talked about trust, but, like, what are the guardrails? How do we create the safe container both for the humans, but also as we use AI to set them up to be successful? And it's a level of clarity of, like, how do you operationalize empowerment? Right? Like, people are talking a lot about that, things that you can do to operationalize empowerment, but it's not the kind of conversation that, organizations largely have had before, because it's been so directive. And now it's really much more exploratory, because nobody has the, like, perfect crystal ball to say where this is all going to lead us.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good segue to turn to your book, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So your book title immediately grabs your attention, right? Move fast, break stuff, different S word, burnout. What inspired you to write the book, and what will folks get from reading it?
What inspired us was sort of there's two sides to that too. One is just like, what was the book that I wish that I had had really early on in my career that would have saved me a lot of pain and heartache and burnout? And then it's also a love letter to these people who, it is not easy to be a catalyst. You are often the lightning rod for change. And so, the leadership, when they recognize you, might send you off on a mission to go do something, but inevitably that's going to cause resistance, and people don't understand where their own resistance is, playing a role in that. And a lot of the resistance gets taken out on the catalyst personally. And so that's a really hard place to be. So the book for catalyst is often, we get still emails. We wrote the book in 2020. We still get notes about, this has changed my life. I was reading this and I broke down into tears. I feel so seen. It's like having people just be like, oh my God, I'm not broken and I'm not damaged. And there's other people out there that are like me. And it's normalizing this really, what can be a very tough experience. And just to be clear, the name of the book, obviously there's the tongue in cheek sort of nod to the Facebook, sort of nomenclature there, but it's also defining, like, what our default pattern is if we're not self-aware and if we're not making different decisions. So we move really fast. We can break stuff without intentionality, which is not to say that we shouldn't be breaking stuff, because the old systems have to be changing, but we want to make sure we're breaking the right stuff, because if we're breaking the wrong stuff, that resistance increases and that leads to the burnout. And so the second part of the title is The Catalyst Guide to Working Well. And so this is really the antidote to that way of working. And it's not clear that we can stop Catalyst from burning out. Like right now, I'm running on fumes headed into vacation, right? But it's like, how do we decrease the amplitude and the frequency of the burnout? For leaders, it's a really great book to understand those hidden gems that are in your organization. And you'll really start to understand how they operate and how you can sort of like tap into this amazing change, excited energy that can really unlock a lot in your organization.
Yeah, a couple of problems that I've seen is one, burnout, I guess we'll call it, gets normalized inside a lot of organizations. Yeah, I've seen people almost bragging, "Oh, I worked through this weekend. Well, I stayed up until 2 a.m. on Saturday." And then you start to get the emails on Sunday mornings, and everybody seems to be outdoing each other. And I guess we'll call it normalizing that whole burnout situation. So that's the one side. And then the other side is that burnout is sort of invisible in employees. You don't necessarily see it until it's too late. So, how do we reconcile these two? And what are the warning signs leaders can look for so that employees don't hit that wall and get burned out?
I totally agree with you about the normalization, and even like AI is really accelerating that and amplifying that because people are adding, actually, if you're leaning into AI, a lot of people are adding more work to their, because they're like, because I can do this because of AI. And also just because the speed and again the amplitude of change is just so intense that it just leads to like more iteration, more work to be done. As leaders, we need to model better behavior. So, one of the things that Tracy helped me see early on is like, as you're headed into burnout, if you start getting the signals, take the afternoon off so that you can binge Netflix and enjoy it instead of being sick in bed for a week where you're sleeping through the Netflix as you're binging it because you're sick. So we have to start modeling, like making the better choices. The important thing around all of this is having healthy boundaries. And that's not always easy in an organization that is normalizing it. So I say that, and I understand some of the ramifications there. But as leaders, like we're gonna, in the most cynical terms possible, we're gonna get less out of our people if they're burning out. And so how do we make sure we're prioritizing them? Organizations really struggle with saying no. So we've had to add a lot. We're adding AI, we're adding this, we're adding this. Like, what are we taking off the plate or saying not right, not right now to? And then what are the early warning signs? It's interesting. And I would encourage the listeners to start paying attention to this because for me, I've gotten clearer and clearer on some of the really early warning signs. So I start dropping things more. I'm literally becoming unbalanced. And so I start dropping things more. I start ordering out or ordering delivery more than cooking normal food. I start letting my gym practice go. I go just a couple times instead of 5 days a week. I don't call my friends as much. Like, what are some of the early things before I start getting the physical manifestations, which is your exhaustion, your headache, you don't want to get out of bed anymore, all the way to like you physically can't get out of bed anyway. So it's important to look for those, know your own early warning signs. For those on your team, if their performance starts dipping, if they're not participating in the ways that they normally did in meetings, I think those are two big things when you start to see just some of those like behavioral shifts that are unexplained and happening. The other thing I would say is also just bringing curiosity and normalizing the conversation. So we just ran a workshop last week where we were asking people like how they personally, this is leaders who are leading an entire organization through this massive change. And so we stopped and we asked them a question, like think about some change that's going on in your life and how that may be impacting you towards this sort of burnout conversation. And one woman raised her hand and she was like, I live in constant fear that I'm going to be deported right now.
Hmm.
And it's like, you don't know as a leader what's going on with your people outside of work, even that's going to be It's not always work that's contributing to the burnout, right? There's just a lot of change going on in the world. So normalizing it, creating the environments where people can reflect and share with you. And it also just comes back to trust, Dave, like you were talking about, like be the trusted leader where someone can come to you and say, I'm really struggling with this.
Yeah, everybody's got stuff going on underneath the surface. You just don't see it, but you've got
Right.
to assume that they do. So be kind. I mean, you're talking about taking the afternoon off and binging Netflix. My first thought was, if you're a catalyst type personality, how hard that must be to disconnect for your own mental health and well being.
It is super hard. And the way that we have helped Catalyst do that, so I feel very seen. I'm wondering if that's also sort of personal reflection. It is. It's really hard because as a Catalyst, you're like, but I'm not moving the thing forward. I'm not making it better. I'm not making it better. And what we help Catalyst connect the dots to is a burnt out Catalyst creates no change at all. And so catalysts are much more likely in the early stages of learning these behaviors to start to take the breaks earlier in service of the change that they're trying to make, sadly, not in service of taking care of themselves first. Now I value myself and also like taking care of myself as well as driving positive change. So I can do it for both reasons.
Nice. We're getting close to the end here. I want to make sure that I give you the last word here. What haven't we talked about that you want to make sure that leaders understand so when they are done listening to this podcast, they can implement today or tomorrow that's going to better their organization?
I think just, one of the things that we're really focused on right now is starting the conversations in your organizations very explicitly about how people are relating to change. So I was brought into one organization early days. We're still working with them 5 years later by the head of innovation. And that was one of the questions that they were asking is like, we're really good at leading change, but how do we help the rest of the organization? But as we started unpacking even how the innovation team showed up for change, they still had some fear of failure themselves. And this was the innovation team. And so if we don't normalize talking about like what our relationship with change is, and as a disclaimer, it's different for every change. So, you have to think about and have the conversation often. And it's an ongoing thing because we live in a world of change. But you have to start by normalizing like, how are you feeling about this change? Where are you on the change curve? And how can we support you through this? Because this change is inevitable, but we want to take you on the journey. And then, of course, I have to plug for finding your catalyst and supporting them so that you have a movement of people across the organization who are going to bring the rest of the organization on the change journey for you.
Nice. Shannon, tell the audience how they can find you, how they can find your book.
Would love to connect on LinkedIn. So please look me up there. The book is most places that you buy books online. You know the name. And also you can check out our website at catalystconstellations.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Super fun conversation. Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure. And thank you out there for listening to Behind the Numbers. Really appreciate your support of this program. That is all we have for today, gang. So until next time, I am Dave Bookbinder, reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care. We'll see you next time on Behind the Numbers.